think, it would be good if we could really think that this working party is one that we're all engaged in and we've all got a sense of support for the decisions that come out of it. So thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you very much, Peter and George, and it's been good for us to hear that viewpoint directly. As you're aware, we've got an item on the agenda today, item number 14. So I'm going to suggest to councillors that we don't debate the issue now, but rather that we simply direct any specific questions that any councillor might have to our two senior representatives here from the boards. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. People, when you made the vote on Monday as to the number, had the chairs discussed this with their boards, and was that a board view through the chair, or was it a decision that the chairs made individually without discussing it with their boards?
It was the latter. We haven't had time for all the boards to meet and discuss this, no.
Thank you. Any further questions? If not, our two representatives are welcome to be here for the discussion that takes place under item 14. But I'd like personally to thank Peter Haynes and George Wood for presentation and attendance. It's great that we have had such senior representation here, but we will be taking on board the points that you've made and discussing them at item number 14. I'll move the thank you. Have we got a seconder? Professor Collins. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. Carried.
Thank you.
Sorry. I just before you leave the table, I wasn't aware Councillor Newman had indicated a desire to ask a question.
Your Worship, it wasn't so much a question. I'm just wondering, looking at item 14, it looks at this stage quite a procedural matter. I'm just wondering if you could indulge by perhaps taking it as readjusting the precedence of business in the agenda to address item 14 now, and we just get that one off the books so that we've addressed that one. I mean, we will have a bit of discussion around.
I can bring it up the agenda and will do so. I want to deal with the annual budget first because there are others from the public here that are interested in the next item. So I may bring that up to item number 12 if that suits the convenience of our local board members. Thank you for that. Right, the motion has been moved and put and carried with acclamation. Extraordinary items, we have none. Notices of motion, we have none. The item number 11, the annual budget, mayoral proposal for items of public consultation, is the next item on the agenda. Can I ask Matthew Walker to come up to the table, please? And maybe if David Wood can make himself available as well if there are questions there. Councillors, you'll be aware that we've already had extensive discussion on the annual budget and the mayoral proposal, both at this governing body, at a workshop at the Finance and Performance Committee, and at the Finance and Performance Committee on Tuesday of this week. So we may not need to have the extensive discussion again now, but of course any councillor is entitled to ask questions and to move amendments if they so choose. Excuse me one moment. Oh, sorry.
Please don't forget our contract leaders.
I'll just, it's a Christmas card from those that work so hard in our cleaning staff to look after the buildings that we occupy. So thank you very much to all of you at the back there. Can I thank you for your hard work during the year, and can I wish you all a very Merry Christmas on behalf of all of us as councillors and Mayor. Thank you very much. So if I return to item number 11, it may not require, we don't want to reiterate the discussions and the arguments we've already had. That's not to deny any councillor the right to participate in the debate and to ask questions, but I'll ask just to take into account that we've covered a lot of this ground already. So that we've got it on the table, I will move the recommendation that is set out in front of you, and Councillor Ross Clow, I think, has indicated he wishes to second that. Matthew, would you like to speak to the paper briefly? Yeah, we'll come to you soon, Councillor.
I'm happy just to be here for questions.
Okay, that shortens the process. Right, so questions. If I can just ask councillors to direct questions to Matthew or Matthew from our official staff, our professional staff, and David from my office. So questions first, not speeches, please. So are there any questions? If there are no questions, we can move straight to the debate.
Can I ask one question?
Councillor Simpson.
Was there in the recommendation to look at other revenue streams? Wasn't that added at the finance?
That was added in, and
it was operating revenue streams.
yeah, not. I looked at this. I only received this
Because that's not fine.
recommendation this morning. It hasn't got all the detail in. Can you just excuse me?
I added that.
Yeah.
Yeah, the noting that's...
With the key emphasis on
The point that is being made is that these are the recommendations, but that was adopted, I think, as a noting point, Elaine. So
An
what we've
amendment.
put up is, but the consultation document itself, I'm hoping will reflect the point that you made and was passed by council committee earlier in the week.
But wasn't it amendment?
It was, sorry,
It went into the...
So, sorry, can I just have some order? Chair of the committee was Councillor Clow. Can I ask you to comment on it,
yeah, no,
please?
it was an amendment, it wasn't a note, it was an amendment, and it was operating revenue streams, and it was added into the recommendations from the Finance Committee, so it wasn't a note.
Okay, so look, I'm easy about that. We can add that in. If I can ask officials to add that while we're going through the process of discussion of the document. Are there a question from Councillor Fletcher?
Thank you, Matthew. I just wonder, in the crafting of the budget, whether, in addition to a targeted rate, which we have for, I suppose, with the tourism focus, whether there was a view that there could have been an opportunity with a targeted rate for the airport precinct. That is the responsibility of the airport company, and as somebody who has actually supported the retention of the airport shares because of its strategic importance, we do have the opportunity of looking, and I see today that there is the announcement of a transport group to have a look at some of the congestion issues there. Have you explored that?
So, through the chair, if I'm understanding that right, I mean, only to the extent that there'll be accommodation providers in the precinct. So that's the intention at the moment. We haven't thought separately
I'm
about
thinking
the
beyond
precinct.
the accommodation providers. I'm thinking just in terms of other opportunities, given the importance of the airport and the increasing growth that we're seeing in that area and the opportunity for revenue. Was that a consideration that was put up to the Mayor?
So, through the chair, not explicitly.
No. Thank you very much. Councillor Sayers, followed by Councillor Casey.
Mr Mayor, just following on from Councillor Simpson's comment from the Finance and Performance Committee meeting, just to remind that I'd foreshadowed that I'd be making an amendment today, Mr Mayor, that was all.
Yep, we've noted that.
Okay,
So we're just doing the questions at the moment. Councillor Casey?
It's probably a question to Matthew with regard to extending the living wage from council staff to contractors. And congratulations to the Mayor for suggesting the living wage for council staff over the next 3 years. But on the subject of contractors, will there be work done in these 3 years to look at extending the living wage to contractors, and particularly any changes that might be required to our procurement practices?
So, through the chair, there's no plan to undertake that work at the moment, no.
Okay. Can I might ask the chair if he has got any plans for his second term in office to extend the living wage to contractors?
I think before the election, to answer the question, I indicated that the first step and the foundation stone would be the living wage being paid to members of the council proper and the CCOs, and that I would look beyond that period at what could be done in terms of contractors. I expressed the concern that I didn't know what the financial and the legal and the wider wage negotiation implications would be. So the short answer is, once we've laid the foundation, we need to start work on answering some of those other questions. But I am very focused on laying the foundation first, as you'll understand. Any other questions from councillors?
Yeah, I've got one, Mr. Mayor.
Yep, Councillor Cashmore.
Thank you, sir. I think it's probably to you, Mr. Walker, and that's about the combined rate savings or efficiencies that the council is gaining at a 2.5% rate increase. So we're looking at this current year of saying you could comment on these savings if they're ramping up at 2.5%. We're going from 118 out to year 2025, $275 million in accumulated savings, efficiency gains. And at 2%, that actually ramps up to 373 million. The practicality of achieving these sorts of pressures, absorptions, given that our population growth of over 45,000 this current year and probably more next year. In a financial context, Mr. Walker, how possible are some of these savings to bring to reality?
Exactly. Through the chair, responding to the question, and we sent some of these figures out last night. So I think, and we've shared some of this data with you over the last couple of weeks, which I'll reflect on a little bit in the context of the growing city. But to the information itself, we loaded in pretty significant savings targets through the 15-25 LTP budget. The impact of those savings, and we talked this through in recent workshops, was that council's core operating cost budgets, which are around the 2.2, growing to 2.3, 2.4 billion, have an annual growth rate that has been travelling at well under 2%, and we're projecting to hold at 2%. What we were wanting to emphasise through sharing that information with councillors was that is pretty tight against growing population pressure, growing demand for council services and growing asset base. So irrespective of, I think, the well understood, at times double-digit growth in our depreciation lines and interest expense, holding core cost growth, which means making provision for all the additional maintenance and operations associated with our growing asset base, to be frank, is a hell of an ask at where we've got it set at the moment at close to 2%. So our advice to this table is that it is extremely challenging for management to identify and execute pure efficiency savings. So what we're talking about is taking further cost out of the organisation and having no impact on frontline services. So I think we've been fairly clear in our advice that were councillors to be interested in taking further cost out over and above the existing savings, we think we'd be having a conversation with you about service level cuts.
Sorry, could I just ask a supplementary to Councillor Cashmore's question? I was distracted on another matter just a moment ago. You might have mentioned it, but can you tell us what the fiscal impact would be of a reducing rates to 2% as against 2.5%, and what that would be in the immediate financial year 17-18 and beyond that to 18-19?
So through the chair, so the information that we've shared with councillors, and it's on that table, for next year, for the 17-18 year, to move from the current projection of around a 2.5% general rate increase and to bring that down to 2%, we've outlined that we'd need to find a further 30 million reduction in our operating cost budgets. I could go into that in some detail, but it essentially is a combination of around 7 or 8 million that you'd need to find to keep your operating budget in balance, and there's a further figure of between 15 and 20 million that would need to be found to maintain consistency in our debt to revenue ratios, and thereby not impact in terms of choking your investment program.
Okay, and out to 18, 19, what would that figure increase to?